She went to a fancy party believing she didn't belong in that world, until an accidental kiss changed everything. What seemed like just a stumble turned into an unexpected bond, capable of challenging differences, secrets, and life choices. And unlikely love story, marked by courage, dreams, and new beginnings. Get ready, subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The Blackwood mansion sparkled like a jewel in the New York night. Golden. Lights escaped through tall windows, casting dancing shadows over the meticulously maintained garden. Luxury cars formed an endless line at the entrance, unloading guests in attire that cost more than 3 months of Emily's rent. Emily Parker pressed the small purse against her chest, feeling her heart beat erratically. The black dress borrowed from her cousin hugged her body elegantly, but couldn't completely disguise her feeling of not belonging. She checked her only lipstick once more, applying it carefully while watching the other guests pass by. "Don't give up now," she murmured to herself, reciting the words like a mantra. You didn't come this far to stay at the door. She had saved for weeks for this moment, not for the party itself, but for what it represented, a chance to meet Alexander Blackwood, the son of the owner of BW Investments, where she dreamed of getting an internship. The position would be disputed by hundreds of candidates from the university elite, but Emily knew that a brief contact, a handshake, could make all the difference. The security guard at the door examined her with suspicion, his eyes scanning the printed invitation she held with slightly trembling fingers. After a moment that seemed eternal, he nodded, allowing her entry. The entrance hall was a spectacle of marble and crystal. A monumental chandelier poured light over the guests, making jewelry and smiles sparkle. Emily felt immediately exposed, as if everyone could see through her carefully constructed facade. She breathed deeply and advanced, trying to imitate the posture of the women around her. "Champagne, miss?" A waiter materialized beside her, offering a glass on a silver tray. "Thank you," she replied, taking the glass more to have something to hold than from a desire to drink. She needed to stay lucid. As she advanced through the halls, fragments of conversations reached her. $1 million negotiations, trips to exotic destinations, designer names she only knew from magazines. Everything sounded like a foreign language, incomprehensible and intimidating. Emily discreetly searched for Alexander among the groups, remembering the only photo she'd seen of him on the company website. A serious young man, with a distant expression and penetrating eyes. "First time here, isn't it?" A masculine voice interrupted her thoughts. Emily turned and found a blond young man with a wide smile and eyes slightly reddened by alcohol. He wore a navy blue suit that seemed to have been made to measure for his athletic body. "Is it that obvious?" she asked, trying to maintain composure. "Let's say you seem more interesting than most." He leaned in slightly, invading her personal space. "I'm Richard Martinez. My father is partners with the Blackwoods." Emily Parker. She extended her hand, which he held for too long. "And what makes you deserve an invitation to the most exclusive party of the year?" Emily Parker. The tone was playful, but there was something condescending behind the question. "I came with a friend," she lied, looking away. "She knows the family. Shall we dance?" Richard didn't wait for an answer. His hand wrapped around Emily's wrist, pulling her toward the dance floor, where couples spun to the sound of a live orchestra. Before she could protest, she found herself in the middle of the ballroom, led by firm and experienced steps. Richard danced well, but there was a familiarity in his gestures that made her uncomfortable. His hands descended a little lower than appropriate on her back, and his warm whiskey breath touched her neck with each approach. "What do your parents do?" he asked between spins, the smile never leaving his face. Emily hesitated. She could lie, create a story that fit better in that environment, but something inside her rebelled against the idea. "My father is a mechanic. He has a small shop in Queens. My mother is a seamstress, works from home." Richard's smile faltered for an instant, but soon returned, now with a different gleam in his eyes. Fascinating. A simple girl at the Blackwoods party. The patronizing tone made Emily's stomach twist. The music continued, but she could no longer follow the steps. She just wanted to get out of there, find Alexander, and introduce herself as planned. She tried to pull away, but Richard held her tighter. "Where are you going? The night is just beginning." "I need to find my friend," she said, pulling her arm. Richard approached closer, his body pressing against hers. "I'm sure she can wait. Why don't we get to know the East Wing? It has an incredible view of the city." The disguised invitation was too obvious. Emily felt a chill run down her spine. With a sudden movement, she pushed him away. "Let me go," Some heads turned in their direction. Richard's face hardened, the charm mask giving way to something darker. Emily took advantage of the moment of surprise to pull away, walking quickly away from the dance floor. Without a defined direction, she crossed increasingly less populated halls. The mansion seemed like a labyrinth of corridors decorated with works of art and antiques. She just wanted to find a quiet place to recover her composure before returning to search for Alexander. Turning into a darker corridor, she heard footsteps behind her. Richard was following her, his face now a mask of irritated determination. Emily quickened her pace, opening the first door she found. She entered an immense library. Dark wood shelves rose to the ceiling, filled with leather-bound volumes. The low light came only from some strategically positioned lamps, creating an atmosphere from another century. Emily closed the door behind her, leaning against it for a moment while her heart slowed down. The silence there was almost palpable, a welcome contrast to the music and conversations from the main hall. Her eyes scanned the room, noticing the sophisticated details. An antique desk, leather armchairs, decorative globes. On the other side, French doors seemed to lead to a garden. Determined to escape completely, Emily crossed the library toward the doors. She needed fresh air, a moment of calm to reorganize her thoughts. Perhaps later she could return, more prepared to face that world that wasn't hers. She pushed one of the French doors with force, anxious for the freedom that the exterior promised. It was at that exact moment that the universe decided to change the course of her story. The door, upon opening, found unexpected resistance. On the other side, someone was trying to enter at the same instant she was trying to exit. The impact made Emily lose her balance. She stumbled forward, her hands instinctively seeking support. They found not a wall or a handle, but firm shoulders. A pair of strong hands held her by the arms, preventing her fall. The sudden movement brought their faces close, and, before either could avoid it, their lips touched. It was an accidental kiss, brief as a sigh. A soft touch that lasted only a fraction of a second, but sent a shockwave through Emily's entire body. She immediately pulled back, eyes wide. Before her stood a tall man with dark hair and eyes that seemed to capture all the light in the room. He wore an impeccable black suit, but there was something disheveled about his tie, as if he had just loosened it seeking relief. "I'm sorry," he stammered, equally surprised. "I didn't mean to. It was an accident." Emily remained silent, unable to formulate a coherent response. Her heart beat so loud she was sure he could hear it. There was something familiar about that face, something she couldn't immediately identify amid the confusion of the moment. "What's happening here?" Richard's voice broke the moment, making both turn toward the library entrance. He stood in the doorway, his face contorted in a mixture of irritation and confusion. The stranger quickly recomposed himself. With a fluid movement, he passed his arm around Emily's waist, pulling her close to him. "She's with me," he declared, in a tone that admitted no contest. The gesture surprised Emily as much as Richard, but she didn't pull away. There was something protective about that improvised embrace, something that made her feel safe for the first time since entering that mansion. Richard stared at both for a long moment. His gaze went from the man to Emily and back, as if trying to decipher a particularly complex puzzle. Finally, something in his expression changed. Recognition, perhaps, and he stepped back. "Sorry, I didn't know," he murmured, before withdrawing, hastily. When they were alone again, silence fell like a heavy blanket between them. The arm around her waist loosened, but didn't withdraw completely. Emily allowed herself to look better at the stranger who had just saved her night, and with whom she had accidentally shared a kiss. It was then that the penny dropped. The same intense eyes, the defined jawline, the elegant posture she had seen in the photo on the company website. "You're Alexander Blackwood," she said, not as a question, but as an astonished statement. A hesitant smile appeared on his lips, completely transforming his expression. There was no arrogance there, just genuine curiosity. "And you are?" "Emily. Emily Parker." She stepped back a little, recovering her personal space. "I thank you for helping me with him. Richard can be persistent." Alexander also stepped away, running his hand through his hair in a gesture that seemed more natural than calculated. "He bothered you much?" "Nothing I couldn't handle," Emily replied, trying to sound more confident than she really felt. "I just needed a moment alone, and I interrupted your escape." Alexander laughed softly. With an unexpected encounter, Emily felt her face heat up. It was an accident, the best kind of encounter, in my opinion. He tilted his head slightly, observing her more attentively. I don't remember seeing you before at family parties. It's my first time. She hesitated, uncertain whether she should reveal her real reason for being there. She decided on honesty. Actually, I came hoping to meet you. His eyebrows rose in surprise. Really? And why? I want to intern at your company, at BW Investments. The words came out rushed. I'm in my last year of economics. I'm first in my class, and I thought maybe a personal contact would help with the selection, he completed, his expression unreadable. Emily felt her stomach sink. Said that way, it sounded calculating, opportunistic. It wasn't the impression she wanted to make. It's not exactly like that, she began to explain. But Alexander raised his hand, gently interrupting her. Don't worry, I admire the initiative. His smile returned, now with a different gleam in his eyes. And since we met in such a peculiar way, how about we continue the conversation in a quieter place? He pointed to the French doors leading to the garden. Emily hesitated for a moment, divided between caution and curiosity. Finally, she nodded. After all, it was exactly what she had come to seek, a chance to impress Alexander Blackwood. What she didn't expect was that he might also impress her. The Blackwood garden was an oasis of tranquility amid the chaos of the party. Stone paths serpentined between meticulously maintained flower beds, and small lights decorated the trees like stars fallen from the sky. The music and voices from the mansion arrived muffled, almost like a distant memory. Alexander walked beside Emily in comfortable silence. Occasionally, their arms lightly touched, sending small sparks of electricity through her skin. The night air was perfumed with jasmine and something else she couldn't identify. Perhaps the expensive fragrance he wore, subtle and masculine. So, he finally broke the silence. First in your class in economics? Emily nodded, feeling less intimidated now that they were away from the gazes of other guests. Columbia University. I got in with a full scholarship. Impressive. Alexander seemed genuinely interested. Columbia's selection process isn't for just anyone. I studied a lot, she admitted. My parents couldn't afford a private college, so it was my only chance. Instead of the pity or discomfort that Emily frequently saw on people's faces when she mentioned her financial situation, Alexander just smiled approvingly. Personal effort. That's worth much more than a known last name. There was such sincerity in his voice that it caught her by surprise. This wasn't the arrogant air she expected to find, but someone with depth beyond the polished surface. They reached a marble fountain in the center of the garden. Crystal water fell in gentle cascades, creating a relaxing melody. Alexander stopped, contemplating the structure with an expression that mixed admiration and melancholy. My mother designed this fountain, he commented, almost as if speaking to himself. She was an architect. She loved incorporating water into her projects. She said water connects everything, that it's always in movement, just like life. Emily observed his profile against the soft light of the garden. There was vulnerability in his expression, something rare in someone of his position. She sounds like she was a wise woman, Emily commented softly. She was. Alexander turned to her with a sad smile. It's been 5 years since she passed. Cancer. I'm sorry. Emily instinctively touched his arm, a gesture of comfort. The touch seemed to bring Alexander back to the present. He covered her hand with his for a brief moment, before indicating a stone bench near the fountain. Shall we sit? Side by side, watching the water dance under the moonlight, conversation flowed with surprising ease. Alexander asked about her family, and Emily spoke about her mechanic father who could identify an engine problem just by the sound, and about her seamstress mother, whose magic hands transformed scraps into party-worthy dresses. They must be proud of you, Alexander commented. They are, Emily confirmed with a smile, even though they don't exactly understand what I study. For them, economics is basically how to save at the supermarket. Alexander laughed, a genuine and relaxed sound that seemed displaced in that environment of calculated sophistication. And you? Emily asked, taking advantage of the moment of openness. Did you always want to follow the family business? Something changed in his expression, a passing shadow, almost imperceptible, but that Emily caught. It's complicated, he replied after a pause. It was always what they expected of me, but it's not what you want. It wasn't a question, and the accuracy of the observation made Alexander stare at her with renewed intensity, as if seeing her really for the first time. How did you reach that conclusion? Emily shrugged, suddenly aware of the boldness of her comment. Just an impression. From the way you spoke. Alexander remained silent for a moment, contemplating the fountain. When he spoke again, his voice had a confessional tone. You're right. I have another dream. He hesitated, as if the next words cost extraordinary effort. Music has always been my passion. Piano, specifically. The revelation surprised Emily. Of all possibilities, a pianist was the last thing she would expect from the heir of BW Investments. Do you play well? Well enough to have been accepted at the Vienna Conservatory. The pride in his voice was unmistakable, even tempered by the resignation that followed. But I declined the offer. My father had a heart attack the same month I received the acceptance letter. I couldn't leave him alone. Emily felt a pang of empathy. She knew well the weight of family expectations, although in completely different circumstances. And now I manage part of the family business during the day, Alexander replied, and play piano at night when no one is listening. There was a melancholy in the confession that deeply touched Emily. Under the layer of privilege and wealth, Alexander carried his own form of prison, golden, but still a prison. I'd like to hear you play someday, she said, surprising herself with the boldness. His eyes met hers, intense and questioning. Are you sure? Most people prefer to talk about investments and market strategies with me. I'm not most people. The smile that lit up Alexander's face transformed him completely. It was as if a mask had fallen, revealing the real man behind the air. No, you definitely aren't, he agreed, standing up and extending his hand to her. Come with me. Where to? Emily asked, accepting the offered hand. I want to show you something. He led her through less illuminated paths of the garden, moving even further from the party. His hand remained holding hers, warm and firm. They reached a smaller structure separate from the main mansion, a music house with glass walls that reflected the moonlight. Alexander took a key from his pocket and opened the door. My refuge, he explained, inviting her to enter. The interior was a sanctuary dedicated to music. A Steinway grand piano occupied the center of the space, surrounded by shelves with sheet music and some other instruments. The walls were acoustically treated, creating an environment of perfect isolation. It's beautiful, Emily murmured, feeling privileged to know such a personal space. Alexander approached the piano, delicately running his fingers over the keys without pressing them. There was an intimacy in the gesture, like someone caressing an old friend. No one besides my music teacher enters here, he confessed. Not even my father. The weight of the confession wasn't lost on Emily. He was sharing a part of himself that he kept hidden from the world, a privilege she didn't expect to receive that night. Why are you showing me this? Alexander seemed to reflect on the question, searching for the answer within himself. Maybe because you saw me, he replied finally. Not Richard Blackwood's son, not the heir of BW Investments, just Alexander. There was vulnerability in his voice, and Emily felt something move inside her, a connection that transcended the social and economic differences that separated them. Will you play something for me? She asked softly. Without responding, Alexander sat at the piano. His hands hovered over the keys for a moment, as if carefully choosing what to share. Then, with a fluid movement, he began to play. The first notes were soft, almost hesitant, like a whispered question. Gradually, the melody gained strength, unfolding in complexity and emotion. It wasn't a piece that Emily recognized, but it touched something deep within her. There was joy and sadness intertwined, dreams and resignation, all expressed through those fingers that danced over the keyboard with absolute mastery. Alexander played with his eyes closed, completely immersed in the music. His body moved with the melody, now leaning forward in the intense passages, now gently pulling back in the more delicate moments. It was as if another person had taken the place of the contained businessman, someone passionate, free, authentic. When the last note dissipated in the air, the silence that followed seemed almost sacred. Emily realized there were tears in her eyes, though she didn't know exactly why. Did you compose this? She asked, her voice little more than a whisper. Alexander opened his eyes, slowly returning to reality. Yes, I call it Paths Not Taken. It's beautiful. Emily approached the piano, moved by the honesty of that moment. You should be in Vienna. A sigh escaped his lips. Maybe in another life. Why not in this one? The question hung between them, loaded with possibilities. Alexander studied Emily's face, as if searching for something in her eyes. Sometimes I wonder the same thing, he finally admitted. A soft knock on the door broke the moment. A household employee appeared, looking embarrassed to interrupt. "Mr. Alexander, your father is looking for you. The Nakamuras have arrived, and he'd like to introduce them." The heir's mask returned to Alexander's face almost instantly. He thanked the employee and promised to return in a few minutes. When they were alone again, Emily realized it was time to step back. That magical moment had been just that, a moment, a parenthesis in the reality that both inhabited. "I should return to the party," she said, preparing to leave. "Wait." Alexander rose from the piano. "I want to see you again." The declaration caught her by surprise. "Why?" "Because with you I can be just Alexander. Not the heir, not the executive, just me." There was a disarming sincerity in his words. Emily felt her heart accelerate, but reason still spoke louder. "I don't think it's a good idea," she replied, though every cell in her body disagreed. "I came here for a specific reason. The internship. Mixing things would only complicate everything." The internship. Alexander seemed to suddenly remember. "The interviews start next week. Have you already applied?" "Yes, I was the first to send my resume." Emily straightened her shoulders, returning to professional posture. "And I intend to get the position on my own merit, not by connections." An understanding smile appeared on Alexander's lips. "I understand and respect that, but nothing stops us from meeting after the selection process is over, right?" The proposal was tempting, a commitment that preserved her professional integrity while leaving the door open for something more. "Maybe," she conceded, "if I get the position." "When you get the position," he corrected, with a confidence that made her smile. The employee reappeared at the door, now more insistent. Alexander sighed, resigned to return to his role. "I need to go," he said, approaching Emily. "But first," he took a business card from his jacket's inner pocket and wrote something on the back. "My personal number," he explained, handing the card to her. "For when you're ready to show me that there's more to life than financial statements." Emily accepted the card, feeling the weight of that small rectangle of paper in her hand. It was more than a contact. It was a possibility, a promise of something she never imagined finding at that party. "Don't forget me, Emily Parker," Alexander said, his voice low and intense. "How could I?" she replied, remembering the accidental kiss that had changed the course of that night. Our encounter was unforgettable. With a last smile, Alexander left, returning to the world of expectations and responsibilities that awaited him. Emily remained for a moment in the music house, her fingers caressing the piano keys where, minutes before, he had exposed his soul. When she finally returned to the party, she felt as if she had lived an experience outside of time, a modern fairy tale where Cinderella didn't just meet the prince but glimpsed the real man behind the crown. The problem is that fairy tales end at midnight, and real life was just beginning. The following week passed in a blur of anxiety and preparation. Emily reviewed her resume dozens of times, rehearsed answers to possible questions, and obsessively researched BW investments. She tried not to think about Alexander, focusing only on the professional goal, but her mind insisted on returning to that night in the music house. The card with his personal number remained stored in her drawer, untouched, a constant temptation that she refused to give in to. "Want coffee? You look like you didn't sleep at all," observed Rachel, her roommate, while Emily studied the company's latest financial reports at the kitchen table. "I'm fine," Emily replied automatically, her eyes never leaving the spreadsheets. "The interview is only tomorrow." "You already know more about that company than the owners themselves," Rachel joked, placing a steaming cup beside the papers. "Drink, for me." Emily gave in, thanking with a tired smile. The small apartment they shared in the village didn't have much space, but made up for it in location, close to the university, and with easy subway access. "Sorry for being so obsessive," Emily said after a sip of coffee. "It's just that this position means so much." "I know," Rachel sat across from her, "but you're going to get it. You're the best student in the class, have experience in extension, projects, and practically breathe numbers. They'd be crazy not to hire you." Emily wanted to share what really kept her awake. Not just the interview, but Alexander's eyes, the music he played, the accidental kiss that still burned in her memory. But how to explain something she didn't understand herself? "Thanks for the confidence," she said simply, returning to the reports. The next morning, she wore her only suit, black, simple, bought on sale, and adjusted by her mother. She tied her hair in a low bun and applied discreet makeup. The image in the mirror showed a young professional, determined and capable. No one would guess that her heart beat erratically, divided between anxiety about the interview and the possibility of seeing Alexander again. BW Investments headquarters occupied an imposing skyscraper on Wall Street. The marble and glass lobby intimidated with its high ceiling and ostentatious security. Emily presented her document and was directed to the 42nd floor, where the interviews would take place. The waiting room was already occupied by other candidates, young people with confident appearances, dressed in clothes that Emily suspected cost more than her entire wardrobe. They conversed in fluent English about MBAs abroad and family connections at big companies. Emily sat in a corner, breathing deeply to calm her nerves. One by one, the candidates were called. Some returned with satisfied smiles, others visibly dejected. When her name was finally announced, Emily felt her legs tremble, but maintained her erect posture as she followed the receptionist. The interview room was minimalist and imposing. A glass table occupied the center, behind which 3 people waited, 2 men and a woman, all in impeccable executive attire. There was no sign of Alexander. "Ms. Parker, welcome," said the woman, a middle-aged executive with perfectly aligned gray hair. "I'm Regina Fields, HR Director. These are Charles Miller, our CFO, and Anthony Lewis, manager of the area where you would be allocated." Emily greeted everyone with a firm handshake, despite her nervousness. "Your resume is impressive," commented Charles, leafing through the papers in front of him. "First in class at Columbia, extension projects in microfinance, published article on emerging markets. Why did you choose BW Investments?" The question was expected, and Emily had the answer ready. She spoke about the company's reputation, its innovative approach to emerging markets, the culture of excellence, all the right professional and well-researched reasons. None mentioned intense eyes or hands that danced over piano keys. The interview continued with technical questions, case studies, and hypothetical situations. Emily felt increasingly confident as she answered. She had studied extensively, and her knowledge flowed naturally. When the last question was answered, Regina smiled slightly. "Well, Ms. Parker, we have more candidates to interview today. We'll be in touch by the end of the week." Emily thanked for the opportunity and stood up, certain she had given her best. While walking to the exit, she felt a mixture of relief and disappointment. Relief for having completed the interview successfully, disappointment for not having seen Alexander. Upon leaving the room, however, her heart almost stopped. Leaning against the opposite wall, apparently absorbed in some document on his tablet, was Alexander. He wore a charcoal suit that enhanced his broad shoulders and a navy blue tie that matched his eyes. He looked even more impactful in daylight, in the corporate environment, than in the party's twilight. Their eyes met, and for an instant, Emily forgot where she was. A small smile appeared on his lips, discreet, but undoubtedly directed at her. "Parker?" He greeted her formally, approaching. "How was the interview?" Emily noticed that some of the other candidates in the waiting room observed the interaction with curiosity. She maintained professional composure, although her pulse had accelerated. "I believe it went well, Mr. Blackwood," she replied in the same formal tone. "Your team is quite thorough. Excellence is our priority." Alexander indicated the corridor with a subtle gesture. "May I accompany you to the elevator?" They walked, side by side in silence until they were out of earshot of curious ears. In the empty corridor, Alexander finally relaxed his posture. "Sorry for the formality," he said, his voice lower and more personal. "There are eyes and ears everywhere here." "I understand," Emily replied, equally discreet. "I didn't expect to see you today. I don't usually participate in initial interviews," Alexander explained. "But I made a point of being on the floor today." The implication made Emily's heart accelerate, but she kept her expression neutral. "I hope that won't influence the decision." Alexander stopped walking, turning to face her. "Do you really think I would do that? Interfere in the process?" There was genuine offense in his voice that made Emily reconsider her defensive approach. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "It's just that all this is very important to me. I want to be sure that if I get the position, it will be on my own merit." His expression softened. "I understand and respect that. Actually, I asked to stay away from the selection exactly for that reason. I don't want there to be any doubt about your competence when you're hired." "If I'm hired?" Emily corrected. "When?" Alexander insisted, with a confident smile. "Regina told me your interview was exceptional." They reached the elevator, and Emily pressed the button, suppressing a smile of satisfaction. The silence that followed was charged with unresolved tension. "You didn't call me," Alexander commented finally, looking at the panel indicating the Elevator's ascent. I thought it best to wait, Emily replied, also staring at the panel, for the selection result. And after? The question hung between them, full of possibilities. Emily finally looked at him, allowing herself for a brief moment to forget the corporate environment and remember the night in the music house. After, we talk, she replied, as the elevator doors opened. Alexander nodded, satisfied with the non-committal but promising answer. I'll be waiting. Emily entered the elevator, feeling the weight of his gaze as the doors closed. She leaned against the metal wall, breathing deeply to calm her accelerated heart. It was just the beginning, and she already felt like walking on a tightrope between professional and personal. The following days were torturous. Emily compulsively checked her phone and email, divided between anxiety for the company's response and the temptation to call Alexander's personal number. Concentrating on classes had become almost impossible. On Thursday, as she left the university, her phone rang. An unknown number. With her heart pounding, she answered. Hello? Ms. Emily Parker? Regina Fields's formal voice was unmistakable. Yes, it's her. I have the pleasure of informing you that you were selected for the internship position at BW Investments. Congratulations. Emily almost dropped the phone. A wave of relief and happiness flooded her, leaving her momentarily speechless. Ms. Parker, are you there? Regina's voice questioned. Yes. Sorry. Emily quickly recovered. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm honored. You were the best evaluated candidate in all stages, Regina informed with professional satisfaction. Could you come tomorrow at 9 a.m. to sign the documents and meet the team? Of course, I'll be there punctually. After hanging up, Emily allowed herself a moment of pure celebration. She gave a small shout of joy, hugging her books against her chest while spinning in the middle of the sidewalk, ignoring the curious looks from passers-by. She had done it, on her own merit. Her first impulse was to call her parents. The second, Rachel. The third, which she repressed after a moment of hesitation, was Alexander. That number etched in her memory remained untouched. But now, with the position guaranteed, there were no more professional impediments. That night, after celebrating with her parents at a simple but pride-filled dinner, Emily finally picked up Alexander's card. She looked long at the handwritten digits on the back, feeling the weight of the decision. Calling meant more than just thanking for the opportunity. It would be opening a door to something undefined, possibly dangerous. After much hesitation, she dialed the number and waited, her heart beating strongly. 1 ring, 2, 3. Hello? Alexander's voice sounded surprisingly informal, almost vulnerable. Hi, it's Emily. A brief silence, followed by a noticeably softer tone. Emily, I was waiting for your call. I got the news today, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. I got the position. Congratulations. There was genuine joy in his voice, although I never doubted it. I wanted to thank you, Emily continued, uncertain how to proceed. For what? You got it on your own merit. That's not it. I wanted to thank you for not interfering, for respecting my decision. Alexander laughed softly. It's the least I could do. So, now that the professional barriers are clarified, I think you owe me a date. The frankness of the statement made Emily smile, despite her nervousness. I think I do. Tomorrow you'll be busy with paperwork, he considered. How about Saturday? I know a place where we can talk without the curious looks from the company. Emily hesitated. Meeting with the owner's son of the company where she had just been hired, even outside the work environment, still seemed risky. But the memory of that night in the music house, the connection they had shared, spoke louder than caution. Saturday sounds good, she finally agreed. Great. I'll send you the address by text. And Emily, yes? I'm glad you called. That night, Emily slept with a smile on her face, divided between excitement about the new job and anticipation for the date. 2 different dreams, converging in ways she could never have predicted. Saturday dawned sunny, with that golden light of late winter that anticipates spring. Emily spent more time than usual choosing what to wear. Nothing too formal, nothing too casual. She opted for a simple blue cotton dress and a denim jacket with comfortable flats. She wanted to look like herself, not a manufactured version to impress. The address Alexander sent led her to a quiet residential neighborhood in the Upper West Side. It wasn't the sophisticated place she expected, but a tree-lined street with well-preserved old houses. As the Uber approached the destination, Emily felt butterflies in her stomach. What was she doing? She'd known Alexander for only a few days, under circumstances so distant from her daily reality. The car stopped in front of a corner house with exposed brick facade and large windows. A discreet sign indicated Lyra Cafe, piano, and literature. It didn't look like a fancy restaurant or exclusive bar, but a cozy and unpretentious place. Alexander was waiting for her at the entrance, dressed surprisingly casually. Jeans, simple white shirt and sneakers. Without the formal suit, he seemed younger, more accessible. He smiled upon seeing her, a smile that reached his eyes. "You came," he said, as if there had been doubt. "I said I would," Emily replied, trying to ignore the warmth that rose to her face when he leaned in to kiss her cheek. "I hope you like the place," Alexander commented, opening the door for her. "It's nothing Austin re-try-G continue editatious, but has something special." The interior was welcoming and intimate. Bookshelves full of books covered the walls. Dark wooden tables were distributed throughout the space with comfortable chairs, and in the center of the environment, a baby grand piano waited silently. The aroma of fresh coffee and freshly baked bread filled the air. "It's perfect," Emily commented, genuinely enchanted. It was exactly the type of place she would frequent on her own, not an environment chosen to impress. An elderly lady with gray hair approached, smiling warmly at Alexander. "Dear, how long? I was wondering when you'd come back." "Hi, Mrs. Clara," he replied, hugging her familiarly. "I missed your coffee. And the piano, of course. Always free for you," the lady assured, before turning to Emily with curious eyes. "And this charming young lady is Emily Parker," Alexander introduced her. "Emily, this is Mrs. Clara, owner of this wonderful place and the best piano teacher I ever had." Emily shook the lady's hand, surprised by the revelation. "Your teacher? Since he was 8, Mrs. Clara confirmed with maternal pride. "Until he got too good for my humble lessons." Alexander laughed, shaking his head. "I never got too good. I just had to follow other paths." Something in his tone suggested a more complex story, which Emily intuited was related to the family expectations he had mentioned earlier. Mrs. Clara led them to a corner table, near a window overlooking a small internal garden. "The usual for you, Alexander, and for the young lady. What do you recommend?" Emily asked. "For a day like today? Our hand-brewed coffee with orange cake still warm," the lady replied confidently. "Sounds perfect." When Mrs. Clara moved away, Emily looked around, absorbing the tranquil environment. Some customers read in silence, others conversed in low voices. Nothing there reminded her of the corporate and luxurious world she associated with Alexander. "So, this is where you hide," she commented, turning back to him. Alexander smiled, relaxed in a way Emily hadn't seen before. "One of the few places where I can be just myself. I've been coming here since childhood. My mother brought me for lessons with Mrs. Clara 3 times a week. And your father knows about this place." A flash of something, sadness perhaps, passed through his eyes. "No, this was a secret between my mother and me. After she passed away, I continued coming, but hidden." Emily felt the weight of that confession. Alexander was sharing not just a place, but a precious and vulnerable part of his story. "Why did you bring me here?" she asked softly. Alexander observed her for a long moment before answering. "Because since that night at the party, I can't stop thinking about you, the way you really saw me. And I wanted to show you more of the real Alexander, not just what everyone sees." The honesty completely disarmed Emily. There were no games or subterfuge in his words, just a simple and direct truth that resonated with what she herself had been feeling. Mrs. Clara returned with the coffee and cake, interrupting the moment. The citrusy aroma of the orange cake mixed with the strong perfume of the coffee, creating a comforting sensory experience. Conversation flowed naturally while they ate. Alexander asked about her parents, about her childhood in the working-class neighborhood, about her dreams for the future. Emily spoke of her mechanic father's determination, who worked 16 hours a day to ensure her education, and of her mother who transformed discarded scraps into beautiful clothes to supplement the family income. She told about nights studying, under the weak light of a lamp, books borrowed from the public library, scholarships earned through effort. In exchange, Alexander shared memories of his own childhood, materially privileged, but not exempt from pressures and expectations. He spoke of his architect mother who encouraged him to follow his dreams, of his workaholic father who was rarely present, but whose approval he always sought. He described the loneliness of large, empty houses, Birthday parties full of partners' children, but few true friends. We're from such different worlds, Emily observed after a pause in conversation. But not as different as it seems, Alexander replied, his eyes fixed on hers. We both know expectations, pressures, the feeling of having to prove something. Emily nodded, recognizing the truth in his words. For different reasons, both carried invisible weights. She, that of overcoming socio-economic limitations. He, that of living up to the family legacy. The morning advanced in deep conversations and shared laughter. Customers came and went, but Emily and Alexander remained in their own bubble of growing intimacy. There was an ease in being together that transcended the differences of their worlds. Eventually, the cafe emptied. Mrs. Clara approached again. Alexander, are you going to play today? It's been a while since we heard your music. He hesitated, looking at Emily. What do you think? Would you like to hear me here? I'd love to, she replied sincerely. With a shy smile, Alexander stood up and walked to the piano. He sat on the bench, adjusting it slightly, and placed his fingers on the keys. For a moment, he remained motionless, as if organizing his thoughts. Then he began to play. It wasn't the same piece from the music house, but something equally personal and emotional. The notes flowed like an intimate conversation, sometimes questioning, sometimes answering, always searching. The few customers remaining in the cafe stopped their conversations, captured by the melody's beauty. Emily watched, hypnotized. The transformation was evident. The controlled executive gave way to the passionate artist, expressing through music what he perhaps couldn't with words. His fingers danced over the keys with precision and feeling, extracting from the instrument not just sounds, but pure emotions. When the last note dissipated in the air, there was a moment of respectful silence before enthusiastic applause. Alexander seemed almost surprised, as if he had forgotten there was an audience. His eyes immediately sought Emily, vulnerable and questioning. She just smiled, unable to articulate the impact the music had on her. There were unshed tears in her eyes, an emotion she couldn't name pressing her chest. Alexander returned to the table, a slight blush coloring his cheeks. What did you think? It was... Emily searched for the right words, feeling them inadequate. It was like you were telling a story. Your story. He nodded, satisfied with the perception. That's exactly it. Each composition is a chapter of my life. This one, he hesitated. This one is new. I started composing it after that night at the party. The implication made Emily's heart accelerate. It's about us, Alexander completed, simply, or the possibility of us. The moment was perfect, intimate, honest, charged with possibilities. Emily felt on the verge of something significant, as if she were about to take a step that would change the course of her life. But reality always finds a way to intervene. Alexander's phone rang, breaking the moment's enchantment. He checked the display with evident irritation, but his expression changed upon seeing the number. Sorry, I need to answer. It's my father, he explained, standing up and moving a few steps away. Emily watched as he talked, noticing how his posture gradually changed. His shoulders became tenser, his face more serious, his voice more controlled. It was like watching a real-time transformation, the passionate pianist giving way to the responsible heir. When Alexander returned to the table, his expression was a mixture of frustration and resignation. I need to go. An issue arose with an important client, and my father needs me in an emergency meeting. Of course I understand, Emily replied, ignoring the pang of disappointment. No, you don't understand, Alexander said, running his hand through his hair. I wanted to stay. I wanted to spend the whole day here with you, learning every detail of your life, sharing more of mine. But this, he indicated the phone, this always happens. There's always something more important, some emergency, some meeting. There was a bitterness in his voice that Emily had never noticed before, the accumulated frustration of years living a life he hadn't completely chosen. We can see each other another day, she suggested, trying to sound understanding. Alexander took her hands over the table, holding them with intensity. I promise we will, and I promise I'll try to make this work somehow. There was so much sincerity in his eyes that Emily felt her heart tighten. She knew that this meant more than just a second date. It meant the possibility of something significant between two worlds that rarely mixed. Alexander paid the bill despite Emily's protests, said goodbye warmly to Mrs. Clara, and accompanied Emily to the sidewalk. A driver was already waiting for him in a discreet but elegant black car. I can drop you at home, he offered. Emily shook her head. I prefer to walk a bit. The subway station isn't far. Alexander nodded, respecting her independence. For a moment they stood face to face, reluctant to say goodbye. Then, in a natural gesture, he leaned in and kissed her. Different from the first accidental kiss, this was deliberate, soft, and questioning. His lips found hers gently, as if asking permission. Emily responded, allowing herself, for a brief moment, to forget all complications and simply feel. When they separated, both were slightly breathless. "Until Monday, Emily Parker," Alexander murmured, still close enough for her to feel his warm breath. "Until Monday, Mr. Blackwood," she replied with a small smile, reminding him that in the office they would return to their formal roles. He laughed, reluctantly pulling away. "I'll call you." Emily watched as he got into the car and left, taking, with him, the magic of that morning. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment, her fingers lightly touching her lips, still sensitive from the kiss. What was she doing? Getting involved with the owner's son of the company where she had just been hired was the definition of complication. It could compromise her professional credibility, make colleagues question her merit, create an impossible dynamic to manage, and yet, as she walked slowly toward the subway, Emily couldn't regret it. There was something real being born between them, something that transcended social status, family expectations, and professional conventions. The question was, would it have enough strength to survive all these obstacles? The first week at BW Investments was simultaneously exhausting and exhilarating. Emily absorbed information like a sponge, determined to prove she deserved the opportunity. Her direct supervisor, Anthony Lewis, seemed impressed with her dedication and technical knowledge. "You learn fast," he commented on Friday, after Emily delivered a detailed analysis he had requested. "Most interns take a month to understand our risk classification system." Emily smiled, satisfied with the recognition. "Thank you. I studied the manual over the weekend." What she didn't mention was that she studied the manual during nights, after returning from long days at the office, forcing tired eyes to absorb every technical detail. She also didn't mention that she had spent the entire week carefully avoiding the 48th floor, where Alexander's office was located. They hadn't spoken since their meeting at the cafe. He had fulfilled his promise to call, but the conversations were brief and careful, both aware of the delicacy of the situation now that Emily officially worked for his family's company. "There's a general meeting on Monday," Anthony informed while collecting his belongings for the end of the workday. "The president will present the new strategy for emerging markets. All interns must be present." Emily's heart accelerated. The president was Robert Blackwood, Alexander's father, and where the president would be, certainly his son and heir would also be. "I'll be there," she confirmed, keeping her voice neutral. During the weekend, Emily tried to concentrate on other things. She visited her parents, helped her mother with some adjustments on dresses she was sewing for a client, and even accepted Rachel's invitation for happy hour with university colleagues. But her thoughts constantly returned to Alexander, the shared kiss, the music he had played, the possibilities that hung between them. On Sunday night, while organizing clothes for the week, her phone rang. Alexander's number illuminated the screen. "Hi," she answered, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Hi." His voice sounded tired, but with a tone of intimacy that made her stomach flutter. "How was your first week?" "Intense. I'm learning a lot." "Are they treating you well?" The concern was evident. "Yes, everyone has been very professional." Emily hesitated before adding, "No one seems to know about us." "And what exactly are we, Emily Parker?" Alexander asked, an audible smile in his voice. The question caught her off guard. What were they? Two acquaintances who shared a kiss? Something more? "Complicated," she finally replied, drawing laughter from him. "Fair enough," Alexander sighed. "I heard you'll be at Monday's meeting." "The whole department will be," Emily confirmed. "Your father will present the new strategy for emerging markets." "Yes, he's been working on it for months." There was a significant pause. "I just wanted to warn you that I'll be there too, and it might be strange." Emily appreciated the consideration. "I'll keep my best serious and professional intern face, and I'll keep my best board executive face." Alexander laughed, but soon became serious again. "Emily, about us. I know the situation is complicated. If you want to step back, I'll understand." The offer was tempting in its rationality. It would be easier, safer, to put an end to it before it deepened, before hearts were broken and careers compromised. But the thought of never seeing Alexander again, of not hearing his music, of not feeling his lips on hers, created an inexplicable emptiness in her chest. "I don't want to step back," she admitted, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "I want to see where this leads, even knowing it will be difficult. Some things are worth the effort." Emily closed her eyes, imagining the smile her words probably provoked. "We just need to be discreet. For now, Alexander repeated, like a promise. When they hung up, Emily felt a mixture of apprehension and expectation. She was embarking on something potentially dangerous for her recently started career, but also possibly transformative for her life. Risk and reward were inextricably intertwined. Monday dawned gray, with heavy clouds promising rain. Emily carefully chose her attire, a navy blue pants and blazer set, discreet and professional. She tied her hair in a low bun and applied minimal makeup. She wanted to appear competent and serious, especially knowing she would be in the same room as Alexander and his father. The 50th floor conference room was impressive, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. Emily entered with the other interns, sitting in the back, according to the unwritten protocol of corporate hierarchy. Senior executives occupied chairs near the head of the table, where an older man with gray hair and authoritative posture checked some papers. Robert Blackwood emanated power and control. Even in silence, Emily could see traces of Alexander in his face, the same jawline, the same penetrating eyes. But where the son had warmth and depth, the father displayed calculated coldness. Alexander entered a few minutes later, impeccable in a gray suit. His eyes quickly scanned the room, landing on Emily for just a second, enough time to send a shiver down her spine. He sat to his father's right, assuming his position as apparent heir. The meeting began punctually. Robert Blackwood presented growth projections, risk analyses, and investment strategies with the precision of someone who completely dominated their field. Emily took notes meticulously, genuinely fascinated by the content. Her gaze occasionally drifted to Alexander, who remained attentive and professional, making pertinent comments when requested. At a certain point, during a discussion about opportunities in Latin America, Emily gathered courage to raise her hand. Anthony Lewis, her supervisor, nodded encouragingly. "Mr. Blackwood," she began, her voice firmer than expected. "Considering the political volatility in the region, wouldn't it be prudent to establish strong local partnerships before any direct investment, especially in countries like Argentina and Chile, where frequent regulatory changes significantly affect returns?" A momentary silence followed her intervention. Robert Blackwood stared at her with renewed interest, as if seeing her for the first time. A perceptive observation. "Ms. Parker." "Emily Parker." Alexander maintained a neutral expression, but his eyes shone with something that seemed like pride. "Ms. Parker is absolutely correct," Robert declared, surprising everyone. "In fact, we've already initiated conversations with potential partners in Buenos Aires and Santiago." He turned to Alexander. "Perhaps we should include Ms. Parker in the working group for the Chile project, don't you think, son?" Alexander nodded professionally. "An excellent suggestion. Her analysis would be valuable, Ms. Parker." Emily felt her face heat up with the sudden attention, but maintained composure. "It would be an honor, sir." The rest of the meeting proceeded, without incidents. But Emily could feel curious glances from colleagues. It wasn't common for an intern to be invited to a high-level working group, especially not in their first week. When the meeting ended, people grouped into small conversations. Emily was collecting her notes when a shadow fell over her table. "Impressive intervention, Ms. Parker." Robert Blackwood's deep voice made her look up. Alexander was beside his father, his expression carefully neutral. "Thank you, sir," she replied, standing up out of respect. "BW Investments values people who think beyond the obvious." Robert studied her with calculating eyes. "Alexander mentioned that you're first in your class at Columbia." Emily shot a quick glance at Alexander. He had spoken about her. "Yes, sir. Full scholarship, correct?" The tone wasn't condescending, but analytical. "Yes. My parents couldn't afford college." Robert nodded, as if confirming something to himself. "Well, I expect valuable contributions from you on the Chile project. Alexander will be leading the team, so you'll report directly to him." With a brief nod, Robert moved away to speak with other executives, leaving Emily and Alexander in an uncomfortably public moment of privacy. "Congratulations on the inclusion in the project," Alexander said formally, maintaining professional distance. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood," she replied in the same tone, aware of curious looks. "I hope to meet expectations." I'm sure you will." His eyes conveyed a completely different message from his polite words. "The team's first meeting will be Wednesday at 2 p.m. My assistant will send the details. I'll be prepared." For a brief moment, something wavered in Alexander's controlled expression, an evident desire to say more, to be more. But the moment passed, and he just nodded professionally before moving away. Emily exhaled slowly, realizing she had been holding her breath. That brief, public encounter had been more intense than many intimate conversations. The tension between what they were professionally and what they were becoming personally created an almost palpable energy. Upon returning to her desk, she found several curious looks from fellow interns. No one asked directly, but she could feel the curiosity, and perhaps a touch of envy, in the air. Her phone vibrated with a message. "You were brilliant in the meeting. Dinner on Wednesday after work? I know a discreet place. A. Emily." Looked around to ensure no one was watching before responding. "Yes, can't wait. E." The following days were a balancing exercise. During the day, Emily immersed herself in work, analyzing reports about the Chilean economy, preparing meticulously for Wednesday's meeting. At night, she exchanged messages with Alexander, conversations that went far beyond professional, exploring dreams, fears, childhood memories. On Wednesday, the working group meeting was productive and professional. Alexander led competently, treating Emily exactly as he treated other team members. No one could suspect the warmth in their nightly messages or the shared anticipation for the dinner that would come after. At 7 p.m., Emily discreetly left the building, walking a few blocks as agreed before getting into a taxi that took her to a small and elegant restaurant in Greenwich Village, far enough from the financial district to minimize the risk of encountering colleagues. Alexander was already waiting for her at a reserved table in the back, partially hidden by decorative plants. He had exchanged his corporate suit for dark pants and a blue shirt without a tie, a middle ground between the executive and the pianist she had met at the cafe. "You look beautiful," he commented when she sat down. Emily smiled, adjusting the simple dress she had brought to change after work. "And you look less like Mr. Blackwood and more like Alexander." "That's exactly how I feel," he confessed, visibly relaxing. "I spent all day waiting to be able to be just myself with you." Dinner was delicious, and conversation flowed effortlessly, deliberately avoiding work topics. Alexander spoke about books he loved. Emily shared stories from her adolescence in the working-class neighborhood. There was a growing intimacy between them, as if each shared meal, each exchanged story, built a bridge over the abyss that separated their worlds. "My father asked about you today," Alexander mentioned while they shared dessert. Emily froze with the spoon halfway to her mouth. "What did he ask?" "Where I knew you from. Apparently he found it interesting that I had mentioned your name even before you started the internship." "And what did you say?" Emily tried to keep her voice calm, though her heart had accelerated. "The truth, partially," Alexander smiled. "I said I met you at the inauguration party for the mansion's new wing." "I didn't mention the accidental kiss, of course." Emily relaxed slightly. "And he believed it? Why wouldn't he? You were there, after all." Alexander hesitated, playing with his spoon. "He was impressed with you at the meeting. Said you have a natural instinct for business. That's good, right? It's exceptional. My father rarely compliments anyone, especially not an intern." Emily should have felt proud, but there was something in Alexander's expression that left her uneasy. "There's something else, isn't there?" Alexander sighed. "He suggested I keep you close. Said people with your determination are valuable to the company." "That sounds like a compliment." "It is, but..." Alexander hesitated, searching for the right words. "I know my father. He sees people as assets, talents to be acquired, nurtured, and used for the company's benefit. And that bothers you?" "It bothers me that he might be right, though for completely wrong reasons." Alexander held her hand over the table. "You are valuable, Emily. Brilliant, determined, authentic, but not as a corporate asset." The warmth of his hand sent a wave of electricity up Emily's arm. "As what, then?" "As someone who makes me question everything." The intensity in his eyes was almost physical. "My plans, my choices, the path I've been following." Emily felt the weight of that statement. In just a few weeks, they had entered deeply into each other's lives, challenging expectations and conventions. "That's scary," she admitted. "Absolutely terrifying," Alexander agreed, but didn't let go of her hand. "And yet I can't imagine stopping." The walk back to Emily's apartment was silent, each lost in thoughts about the complications they faced. Alexander insisted on accompanying her to the door, despite the risk of being seen. At the entrance of the small building, away from the company's eyes, they finally gave in to the tension that had grown throughout dinner. The kiss was different from the previous ones, more urgent, deeper, charged with feelings that hadn't yet been named, but were growing inexorably between them. "This is madness," Emily murmured when they separated, still in his arms. "Completely." Alexander rested his forehead against hers. "But I feel it's the right kind of madness." In the following weeks, they developed a careful routine. At the office, they maintained professional distance, Emily as the dedicated intern, Alexander as the focused executive. Outside it, they met in discreet places, away from curious colleagues' eyes and the Blackwoods' influence. Emily introduced Alexander to the simplicity of street fairs and small neighborhood restaurants. He showed her private concerts and hidden libraries he loved. Together, they discovered neutral territory that belonged neither to her world nor his, but was exclusively theirs. The Chile project advanced, and Emily consistently impressed not only Alexander, but the entire team with her insight and dedication. Her contribution was fundamental in identifying a local partner that others had overlooked, a small family company with extraordinary connections and ethical principles aligned with those Emily defended. "You're transforming this project," Alexander commented during one of their private meetings, now disguised as professional mentoring sessions. "Your suggestion about the partnership with Valdivia Corp completely changed our approach. I just did my job," Emily replied modestly, though internally she was proud. "You did much more than that." Alexander observed her with genuine admiration. "You brought a perspective that no one else had. That's why diversity of experiences is so valuable." Emily smiled, appreciating that he recognized not only her work, but also the value of her different background. It was one of the many reasons she was falling in love with him, because that's what was happening. There was no denying it. With each encounter, each conversation, each glance discreetly exchanged across the office, the feeling grew. It was scary and wonderful at the same time. But while their relationship secretly flourished, the world around them didn't stop, and eventually, secrets have a way of revealing themselves. The first complication came in the form of an invitation. Robert Blackwood was organizing a dinner to celebrate the Chile project's progress, and the entire main team was invited, including Emily. "It's a dinner at the mansion," Alexander explained during a quick lunch at a cafe far from the office. "My father usually does this for important projects. It's part work, part socialization. I'll be at your family's house." As an official guest, Emily pondered, feeling the weight of the situation. It seemed strangely formal for something that started with an accidental kiss in the same place. Alexander laughed, though his eyes remained worried. "The irony doesn't escape me, but we need to be extremely careful. My father is very observant. Do you think he would suspect something between us?" "I don't know." Alexander seemed genuinely uncertain. "He's impressed with you professionally, that's clear. But if he perceives something more, I don't know how he'd react." Emily nodded, understanding the complexity. Robert Blackwood might see a relationship between them as an unwanted distraction, or worse, as something that would compromise Emily's objectivity in the project. "I'll be the perfectly professional intern," she promised. "No one will suspect anything." Alexander smiled, but there was a shadow in his eyes. "That's what worries me most, you know." "What?" "How good we're becoming at hiding what we feel." He leaned over the table, lowering his voice. "Sometimes I wonder how long we can continue like this, pretending we're just colleagues when..." He stopped, leaving the sentence incomplete. But Emily knew what he wanted to say. When what they felt for each other was becoming increasingly deep and undeniable. "One day at a time," she replied softly, resisting the impulse to hold his hand. "It's all we can do for now." The dinner at the Blackwood mansion was a mixture of tension and déjà vu for Emily. Passing through the Golden Gates again, now as a legitimate guest, brought vivid memories of that first night. The insecurity, the accidental kiss, the beginning of everything. This time she wore a dark blue women's suit, elegant but discreet. Her hair was tied in a professional bun, and her makeup was minimal. She wanted to appear competent and serious, not draw unnecessary attention. The other team members were already present when she arrived. Senior executives with their spouses and husbands, mid-level managers, some external consultants. Alexander was talking with a group near the fireplace, impeccable in a black suit that enhanced his elegant posture. His eyes briefly met hers when she entered, and a small smile appeared on his lips before he returned to the conversation. "Robert, Blackwood dominated the environment, moving between groups with the confidence of a conductor leading an orchestra. When he noticed Emily's arrival, he approached with a calculated smile. "Miss Parker, glad you could come. Your contribution to the project has been remarkable." "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood. It's an honor to be part of the team." Robert nodded, examining her with astute eyes. "Alexander speaks very highly of your work. Says you have a refreshing perspective." Emily maintained a neutral expression, despite her accelerated heartbeat. "I'm happy that my contribution is useful. More than useful. Visionary, according to my son." Robert took a sip of his whiskey, observing her over the glass. "He doesn't compliment easily. He inherited that from me." Before Emily could respond, Robert was called by another guest. With a brief nod, he moved away, leaving her with the uncomfortable impression of having been evaluated somehow. Dinner proceeded without incidents, with Emily strategically seated far from Alexander. The food was impeccable. Conversation revolved around the project and social generalities. Emily contributed when appropriate, careful to seem involved but not dominant. After dinner, guests dispersed to the living room and terrace. Emily found a moment to briefly escape, needing a breath. She remembered the way to the library from last time and, instinctively, headed there. The door was ajar, soft light escaping through the gap. Emily hesitated, but the promise of a moment of silence was irresistible. She gently pushed the door. The library was the same old books, the same air of accumulated knowledge, but it wasn't empty. Alexander was sitting in a leather armchair, an open book in his lap, though his eyes were fixed on the French doors leading to the garden, the same doors where they had first met. "We're developing a habit of meeting here," Emily commented softly, closing the door behind her. Alexander looked at her, a genuine smile replacing the social mask he had worn all evening. "I was hoping you'd come." "It was a bit risky, don't you think?" "Calculatedly risky." He put the book aside and stood up. "Everyone's busy discussing golf and politics. No one will notice our absence for a few minutes." Emily approached, allowing herself to relax for the first time that night. "Your father seems intrigued by me." "He is," Alexander sighed. "You impressed him, which is rare. And he noticed my interest in your work." "Only in my work?" Emily asked, arching an eyebrow. Alexander smiled, taking a step toward her. "That's what he presumes, for now." They were dangerously close now, the tension they had repressed all evening finally finding expression. "This is madness," Emily murmured, repeating the words that had become almost a mantra between them. "We're in your parents' house, with all our colleagues just a few meters away." "Complete insanity," Alexander agreed, but his eyes never left hers. "And yet, I can't pull away." The kiss that followed was brief but intense, a necessary release of the tension accumulated for hours of forced distancing. When they separated, Emily remained in his arms for a moment, her head resting against his chest. "We need to go back," she said finally, reluctant. "I know." Alexander pulled back slightly to look into her eyes. "But first, I want to tell you something I've been postponing out of fear of complicating all this even more." Emily felt her heart accelerate. "What?" "I'm in love with you, Emily Parker." The words came out soft, but firm, like a long-contained truth. Completely, hopelessly in love. The world seemed to stop for a moment. All complications, all risks, all differences between their worlds seemed momentarily insignificant before that simple truth. "I'm in love with you too," she replied, the words coming out like a liberated confession. "And that scares me more than anything." The smile that illuminated Alexander's face was radiant, transformative. He pulled her into another kiss, deeper and more meaningful than the previous one, a kiss that sealed a shared truth. It was at that exact moment that the library door opened. Emily and Alexander separated abruptly, turning toward the entrance with expressions of guilty shock. Standing in the doorway, with an indecipherable expression, was Robert Blackwood. A heavy silence filled the library. Robert observed both for a long moment, his face a mask of perfect control. Then, without saying a word, he softly closed the door, leaving them alone again. "My God," Emily whispered, her face pale. "He saw us." Alexander seemed equally shaken, though trying to maintain composure. "Yes, he saw. What do we do now?" Alexander ran his hand through his hair, a gesture Emily already recognized as a sign of stress. "I need to talk to him." "Explain." "Explain." "What? That we've been meeting secretly for weeks? That the owner's son is involved with an intern?" Emily's voice trembled slightly. This could ruin my career before it even begins. I won't let that happen, Alexander promised, holding her by the shoulders. I'll sort this out. Trust me. Emily nodded, though fear persisted. In seconds, their carefully guarded secret had been exposed in the worst possible way. All the concerns they had pushed to the back of their minds now confronted them head-on. I should go, she said, recomposing herself. Make up an excuse and leave before he says something to someone. Alexander shook his head. No, that would look like guilt or cowardice. Let's go back to the party, maintain normalcy. After everyone leaves, I'll talk to him. The logic was sound, but the thought of continuing at the party, now under Robert Blackwood's knowing gaze, was almost unbearable. Still, Emily knew Alexander was right. All right, she agreed. But be careful what you say to him. It's not just about us two. Alexander kissed her forehead softly. I know exactly what's at stake, for both of us. Separately, they returned to the party. Emily maintained a polite smile while talking with colleagues, though her stomach was in knots. Occasionally, her eyes met Robert's across the room. The older man maintained a neutral expression, continuing to entertain his guests as if nothing had happened. But Emily could feel his evaluative, calculating gaze following her around the environment. When she finally managed to leave, about an hour later, Alexander discreetly accompanied her to the door, along with other departing guests. I'll call tomorrow, he promised in a low voice, as they said goodbye formally. As soon as I talk to him, the taxi pulled away from the illuminated mansion, leaving Emily alone with turbulent thoughts. The future they had begun to imagine together suddenly seemed fragile, threatened by a single door opened at the wrong moment. That night was sleepless for Emily. She alternated between periods of acute anxiety about her professional future and moments of reflection on Alexander's words. I'm in love with you. Amid the chaos, that truth shone like a guiding star. The next morning, she prepared for work with extra care, uncertain what she would face. Her phone remained silent. Retry G continue editno message from Alexander, which only intensified her anxiety. The office seemed normal when she arrived. No one looked at her differently. There were no whispers when she passed. Apparently, Robert Blackwood hadn't shared his discovery, at least not yet. Around 10 a.m., Emily received an email that made her blood freeze. Meeting with Robert Blackwood, 11 a.m., executive conference room. No explanation, no context. Her hands trembled slightly as she responded, confirming attendance. She was about to face the consequences, and the absence of communication from Alexander left her even more nervous. At 10:55 a.m., she headed to the 48th floor, her heart beating violently. The executive conference room was smaller and more intimate than the one on the 50th floor, designed for private meetings and important decisions. To her surprise, when she entered, she found not only Robert, but also Alexander, sitting beside his father. His expression was tense, difficult to read. Ms. Parker, punctual as always, Robert commented, indicating a chair across from them. Please sit down. Emily obeyed, maintaining her erect posture despite her nervousness. She was determined to face the situation with dignity, regardless of the outcome. I believe we don't need to pretend ignorance about the reason for this meeting, Robert began, his tone surprisingly neutral. Last night, I witnessed something that clearly has been happening for some time. Emily kept her eyes fixed on him, resisting the impulse to look at Alexander. My son told me everything, Robert continued. How you met at the party, the development of the relationship, the decision to keep it secret due to professional implications. Each word was pronounced with clinical precision, as if discussing a business contract and not a romantic relationship. First, I'd like to clarify that your position at the company was earned exclusively on your own merit, Robert stated. Alexander didn't influence your hiring in any way, as he emphasized repeatedly during our conversation. Emily felt a small relief, though the tension remained. Thank you for recognizing that, sir. However, Robert continued, leaning slightly forward, relationships between employees of different hierarchical levels represent a significant risk for both parties and for the company. Here it was, the reprimand, possibly followed by dismissal. Emily prepared herself internally. Particularly when one of those involved is my son and heir, Robert added, casting a meaningful look at Alexander. Father, Alexander intervened, speaking for the first time. We already discussed this extensively last night. Robert raised his hand, silencing him. I'm just contextualizing the situation for Ms. Parker. Turning back to Emily, Robert continued. There are two issues at play here. The first is professional, how to ensure this relationship doesn't negatively affect either your performance or the perception of your competence by colleagues. The second is personal, the implications of a relationship between people from such distinct backgrounds. The way he said distinct carried volumes of implicit meaning. Social class, economic status, different worlds. With all due respect, Mr. Blackwood, Emily replied, her voice firmer than expected. I don't believe my background is relevant to my professional or personal capacity. A small smile appeared on Robert's face, not of amusement, but of something like approval. Brave. Alexander mentioned that too. He leaned back in his chair. Actually, Ms. Parker, after our long conversation last night, I've reached some conclusions. Emily prepared for the worst. Your work on the Chile project has been exemplary. It would be a significant loss for the company to do without your talent. Robert made a calculated pause, and my son made it very clear that his feelings for you are substantial. Alexander finally looked directly at Emily, his eyes communicating something she couldn't completely decipher. Therefore, Robert continued, I see no reason to interfere in your relationship as long as certain conditions are met. Emily blinked, surprised by the unexpected direction. Conditions? First, Alexander will no longer be your direct supervisor on the Chile project. You'll report directly to Anthony Lewis, who will receive appropriate instructions. Second, the relationship must be formally declared to the Human Resources Department, according to our policy for similar cases. The conditions were surprisingly reasonable, almost banal in their practicality. Emily expected something much worse. And third, Robert added, his tone subtly changing, I'd like to invite you for a family dinner next Sunday. Just me, Alexander, and you, to get to know you properly, not as an intern or guest at a corporate event. This last condition caught Emily completely off guard. A family dinner with the Blackwood patriarch. It was simultaneously intimidating and surprisingly personal. I appreciate the invitation, sir, she replied, trying to process the unexpected turn. Excellent. Robert stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. Alexander will handle the details. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have another meeting. With a brief nod, Robert left, leaving Emily and Alexander alone in the conference room. For a moment, they remained in silence, both stunned by the unexpected outcome. What just happened? Emily finally asked, her voice little more than a whisper. Alexander released the air he seemed to have been holding. Believe it or not, that was my father's approval. In his way, he's not furious, doesn't think I'm, trying to climb socially or something. Alexander stood up and walked around the table, sitting beside her. We talked all night, after everyone left. It was intense. I think I never spoke so honestly with him. About what? About you. About us. About what I want from life. Alexander took her hand, finally allowing himself the contact he had avoided during the entire meeting. I told him everything. How we met. How you make me feel. How for the first time I'm really considering what I want, not what's expected of me. Emily felt her heart tighten with the vulnerability in his voice, and he understood, not immediately. There was shouting, accusations, the complete repertoire of Blackwood family drama. Alexander smiled sadly. But eventually, he listened. Really, maybe for the first time since my mother died. What exactly did you tell him? Alexander looked into her eyes, his expression serious and intense. That I'm in love with you. That you make me want to be better, not as an heir or executive, but as a person. That I've never felt this way about anyone before. The sincerity in his voice made Emily's eyes fill with tears. Alexander, and I said that if he tried to interfere, if he tried to harm you in any way, I would leave the company. The words came out firm, decisive. I think that's what finally made him realize how serious I am. Emily's eyes widened, shocked. You threatened to leave the company? For me? It wasn't an empty threat. Alexander held her hands tighter. I realized something important last night, Emily. All this time trying to be the son my father wanted, suffocating my own dreams. I'm tired. And then you appeared. And for the first time I saw clearly what I was missing. I don't want you to sacrifice your inheritance for my sake, Emily protested, though part of her was deeply touched by the gesture. It wouldn't be a sacrifice. It would be a choice. Alexander smiled softly. I think my father also realized that, and that's why he's giving in. Deep down, he knows he would lose more by forcing the confrontation. And Sunday's dinner? That, Alexander laughed, was completely his idea. I think he wants to see if you're as impressive personally as you are professionally. Emily felt a wave of anxiety. And if he doesn't like me? As a person, I mean. Impossible. Alexander touched her face gently. Besides, I've already seen how you deal with difficult Blackwoods. I have complete confidence in your skills. The comment drew a smile from her, despite the tension. This is madness. All of this. The good kind of madness, remember? Alexander leaned in, kissing her softly. It was the first time they allowed themselves such a gesture within the company, and there was something liberating about it, despite the extraordinary circumstances. What happens now? Emily asked when they separated. Now, Alexander replied, we don't have to hide anymore, at least not completely. We'll still need to be professional in the office, of course, but we won't have to pretend we're just colleagues. The DOR prospect was simultaneously liberating and scary. Their relationship, until now protected by secrecy, would now be exposed, not only to the company's gaze, but also to the Blackwood family's expectations. In the days leading up to Sunday's dinner, Emily alternated between determination and panic. Hours were spent debating what to wear with Rachel, who was still processing the bombshell revelation about the secret relationship. Let me understand this right, Rachel repeated, going through Emily's small wardrobe. You're dating the owners. Son, the father discovered you two kissing, and now he wants a family dinner to get to know you. Summarizing, yes, Emily confirmed, critically examining a navy blue dress. And you're not being fired? Apparently not. Rachel shook her head, incredulous. This is soap opera material, or a Nora Ephron movie. That doesn't help, Rach, Emily sighed, discarding another dress. Sorry, it's a lot of information to process. Rachel sat on the bed. Are you in love with him? Like, really? Emily stopped, the question making her reflect. I am. It's scary how much, considering the short time. And him? Is he serious or just having fun with the intern? He's serious. Emily had no doubts about that. He threatened to leave the company if his father tried to harm me. Rachel whistled softly. Wow, that's intense. I know. Emily picked up a simple but elegant dress with a classic cut. What do you think of this one? Perfect. Sophisticated without looking like you're trying too hard. Rachel examined her friend with genuine concern. Just be careful, okay? I'm not saying he's not sincere, but you come from very different worlds. Believe me, I'm fully aware of that. Emily carefully hung the dress. Every time I enter that mansion, I feel like I'm stepping on another planet. I just don't want you to get hurt or compromise everything you've worked for. Emily hugged her friend, grateful for the concern. I know, I'm trying to be cautious, but at the same time, I've never felt anything like this before, Rach. It's like I'm finally seeing in color after a lifetime in black and white. Rachel smiled, squeezing her hands. Then it's worth the risk. On Sunday, Alexander picked up Emily personally, something they had never done before. Seeing his car, more discreet than the family's but still clearly luxurious, parked in front of her simple building in the village, created a visual contrast that perfectly symbolized the distance between their worlds. You look beautiful, he commented when she got in the car, the chosen dress complemented by a delicate necklace that had belonged to her grandmother. I'm nervous, Emily admitted. Your father is intimidating. Alexander smiled, squeezing her hand encouragingly. He can seem tough, but deep down he just wants the best for me, and he's starting to realize that might include you. The dinner wouldn't be at the main mansion, but at the Blackwoods country house on the city's outskirts, a more intimate and less formal location, according to Alexander. Still, when they arrived at the property, Emily had to control her breathing. The country house was an elegant two-story Mediterranean-style construction, surrounded by lush gardens and overlooking a private lake. This is what you call more intimate, she murmured as Alexander parked. He laughed, understanding her reaction. By my father's standards, yes. Believe me, it's much less intimidating than the mansion. Robert waited for them on the terrace, wearing dark pants and a white linen shirt, considerably more casual than his usual impeccable suit. There was something different about his posture, too. Less corporate rigidity, more humanity. Emily, he greeted her, using her first name for the first time. Welcome to our home. Thank you for the invitation, Mr. Blackwood. Robert, please. We're outside the office. Dinner was served on the terrace, overlooking the sunset over the lake. The food was sophisticated but not ostentatious, and the wine exceptional. To Emily's surprise, conversation flowed with relative ease. Robert asked about her family, her studies, her ambitions, not with the evaluative tone of the initial interview, but with apparently genuine interest. "Alexander told me your father is a mechanic," Robert commented while they savored dessert. "My father also worked with his hands. He was a carpenter." The revelation surprised Emily. Nothing in her research about the Blackwood family mentioned humble origins. "I didn't know that," she replied honestly. "It's not something I mention in annual reports," Robert commented with a slight smile. "But before being Blackwood Investments, we were just a small carpentry shop that my father transformed into a furniture factory. The rest came later, with a lot of work and some risky decisions." Alexander observed his father with a curious expression, as if he too was hearing some of these details for the first time. "You built an empire from scratch," Emily commented, impressed. "Not alone. My wife, Alexander's mother, was fundamental." A shadow of sadness passed through Robert's eyes. "She had vision, saw possibilities where I saw only obstacles." "She seemed like an extraordinary woman," Emily said softly, remembering how Alexander spoke of his mother. Robert nodded, his gaze momentarily distant. "She was. And she would have liked you, Emily. She valued authenticity above all." The comment, apparently simple, carried significant weight coming from the Blackwood patriarch. It was a form of approval that Emily didn't expect. When conversation migrated to music, Robert revealing an unexpected knowledge of classic jazz, Alexander suggested they show Emily the house's music studio. "My wife insisted on including one when we built this place," Robert explained as they walked to the house's interior. "She played cello, not professionally, but with passion." The studio was smaller than the music house at the main mansion, but equally impressive. A grand piano occupied a prominent place, beside a cello that seemed untouched for years. "No one has played since she left," Robert commented, gently running his fingers over the instrument's strings. "Except Alexander, occasionally." "Father," Alexander spoke, after a moment of hesitation. "Remember that composition I showed you last month? The one I'm working on for the benefit recital?" Robert nodded. "Of course, it's excellent. I'd like to play it for Emily, if you don't mind." Something in the exchange between father and son carried meanings that Emily didn't completely understand, but she felt the importance of the moment. "Please," Robert gestured toward the piano. "I'd like to hear it again." Alexander sat at the instrument, adjusting the bench as he always did before playing. He looked briefly at Emily, a small smile on his lips, before beginning. The music that emerged was different from everything Emily had heard him play. It began with hesitant, almost timid notes, which gradually gained confidence and complexity. There was a clear narrative in the composition, a journey from uncertainty to determination, from loneliness to connection. Alexander played with his eyes closed, completely immersed in the moment, his hands moving with passionate precision over the keys. Emily watched, mesmerized, feeling the music resonate in deep places within her. Beside her, Robert also watched, an undeniable expression of pride on his usually austere face. When the last note dissipated in the air, there was a moment of reverent silence before Robert spoke. "You called it accidental encounters, didn't you?" Alexander nodded, his eyes meeting Emily's. "Yes, it was inspired by how we met." Emily felt her face warm, not with embarrassment, but with pure emotion. Alexander had transformed their unexpected encounter into something beautiful and lasting, a musical piece that captured the essence of their story. "It's magnificent," she said softly. "Truly." "I agree," Robert added, surprising them with the sincerity in his voice. "Your best work so far, Alexander." The compliment clearly meant a lot to Alexander, whose eyes shone with contained emotion. "Thank you, Father." A comfortable silence fell over the trio, each absorbed in their own thoughts. It was Robert who finally broke it, with words that would change everything. "You should reconsider the Vienna offer." Alexander looked at his father, clearly shocked. "What?" "The conservatory." Robert kept his voice controlled, though Emily could sense the effort it required. "They offered you another position for next semester, didn't they?" Alexander nodded slowly. "Yes, but I thought it wasn't an option. Maybe it should be." Robert approached the piano, resting a hand on the instrument. "I've heard you play for years, son, but never like today. There's something different now." "Father, Listening to that piece," Robert continued, "I finally understood what Helena always tried to tell me, that you were born for this, not for financial statements or board meetings." Emily watched the exchange with an accelerated heart, feeling she was witnessing something deeply significant. a turning point in the father-son relationship. The company was always my dream, not yours, Robert admitted, the words clearly difficult for him. Helena knew that, and after she left, I clung even more to the idea of you following my footsteps, maybe out of fear of losing another thing I loved. Alexander was visibly emotional, struggling to maintain composure. I always wanted to make you proud, and you did. You do. Robert placed his hand on his son's shoulder. But real pride comes from seeing you follow your own path, not mine. Emily felt almost like an intruder in that intimate moment between father and son, but also understood why she was there. Somehow, her presence in Alexander's life had catalyzed this long-overdue conversation. And what about the company? Alexander asked, his voice unsteady. The family legacy? The company will survive, Robert replied with a small smile. I may not be immortal, but I'm certainly not ready to retire. And there are other paths to preserve the family legacy besides direct succession. Alexander's eyes met Emily's, a mixture of emotions swirling in them. Hope, confusion, possibility. It's an important decision, Robert added. I don't expect an answer now. Just consider it, Alexander. Really, this time. With that, Robert discreetly withdrew from the studio, leaving Alexander and Emily alone with the magnitude of what had just happened. For a long moment, Alexander remained seated at the piano, apparently unable to completely process the conversation. Emily approached, sitting beside him on the bench. Are you okay? She asked softly. I don't know, he replied honestly. I waited so long to hear my father say these things that now it seems almost unreal. Emily took his hand, intertwining their fingers. It's real, and it's an incredible opportunity. Vienna, Alexander murmured as if testing the word. It was always the dream, studying in the cradle of classical music, really developing my potential. You should go, Emily said, though the words caused sharp pain in her chest. It's what you always wanted. Alexander turned to face her completely. It's not that simple now. Before it was just me and my dream. Now there's you. Emily's heart accelerated with the implication. I don't want to be the reason you refuse this opportunity. What if I wanted you to come with me? The question hung between them, loaded with meaning. Emily blinked, trying to process what he was suggesting. To Vienna. Alexander, I have my life here. University, my family. The internship I just got. I know. It's asking too much. Alexander squeezed her hand. It's just that I finally found something as important as music. Someone. And the idea of choosing between the two. Emily felt tears forming in her eyes. What they had built in a few weeks was precious and real, but strong enough to survive such a significant separation, or to justify abandoning her own dreams and obligations. We don't need to decide anything now, she said finally. Your father is right about that. It's too important a decision to be made in the heat of the moment. Alexander nodded, resting, his forehead against hers. You're incredible, you know? Most people would have demanded an immediate answer, a commitment. I'm not most people, Emily smiled, repeating what she had said that first night in the music house. No, you definitely aren't. Alexander kissed her softly, and that's why I'm so completely in love with you. The return to the city was quiet, each lost in thoughts about the future that had suddenly opened before them, full of possibilities but also difficult choices. What had begun as an accidental kiss had transformed into something that now challenged both to reconsider the path of their lives. In the following weeks, Emily and Alexander entered a new routine. At the office, they maintained a cordial and professional relationship, though no longer completely hiding their bond. Outside it, they explored their growing connection, deepening their knowledge of each other, while navigating the uncertain waters of the future. The Chile project advanced successfully, with Emily gaining recognition for her innovative contributions. Alexander divided his time between the company and intensive piano practice sessions, preparing for the Vienna Conservatory's final audition, which he had rescheduled after the conversation with his father. How's the preparation going? Emily asked on a Thursday night, while they dined in her small apartment, something that had become a weekly tradition. Alexander had insisted on getting to know her world as much as she knew his. Intense, he admitted, savoring the simple but delicious stew she had prepared. I'm working on Rachmaninoff and 2 original compositions, including Accidental Encounters. Emily smiled upon hearing the name of the piece inspired by them. I can't imagine what the Austrians will think of a composition inspired by an accidental kiss in a Brazilian mansion. They'll probably find it exotic, Alexander laughed. Europeans love our passionate stories. Rachel had discreetly left, giving them privacy, something Emily deeply appreciated. The small apartment, which once embarrassed her when compared to the Blackwood opulence, now seemed a cozy refuge where they could simply be themselves. "Have you decided?" Emily finally asked, the question that constantly hung between them. "About Vienna?" Alexander put down his fork, his expression becoming serious. "I'm still considering all variables. The conservatory, the company, you. I don't want to be just a variable in your equation," Emily said softly. "This is something you need to decide for yourself, Alexander, for your future." "My future includes you," he replied firmly. One way or another, Emily's heart accelerated with the certainty in his voice. "How can you be so sure? We've known each other for such a short time. Some encounters change everything." Alexander took her hand over the table. "That accidental kiss. Sometimes I think it was the universe intervening, as if everything in my life was leading me to that moment, to that door, to you." The words were so sincere, so heartfelt, that Emily felt tears forming in her eyes. "Do you really believe that?" "I believe I found my other half," Alexander replied simply. "And whether in New York or Vienna, I want to build a life that includes both my music and you." The confession hung between them, heavy with implications. Emily knew they were at a defining point, the moment when they needed to decide if what they had was strong enough to overcome distances, cultural differences, family expectations. "I have something for you," Alexander said, breaking the silence. He took a small envelope from his pocket and handed it to her. Emily opened it carefully, finding inside a brochure from the Vienna University of Economics. "What's this?" "They have a master's program in international economics focusing on emerging markets," Alexander explained, nervousness evident in his voice. "I spoke with some contacts, and with your grades and experience, you'd have good chances of getting a scholarship." Emily examined the brochure, a mixture of emotions swirling inside her. "You researched this for me?" "I'm not asking you to abandon your dreams for mine," Alexander quickly clarified. "Quite the opposite. I thought maybe we could follow our dreams together. You with your masters, me with my music, in a new place for both of us." The proposal was simultaneously scary and exciting, leaving everything behind, family, friends, the comfort of the familiar, to embark on an adventure on another continent. With Alexander. "It's a huge decision," Emily murmured, still processing. "I know, and I don't expect an answer now." Alexander squeezed her hand. "I just wanted you to know I'm thinking about us, about a future together." Emily felt deeply touched by the gesture. It wasn't just an impulsive invitation to follow him. It was a carefully considered plan that respected her own ambitions and dreams. "I'll think about it. Seriously," she promised. "But you need to do the same, regardless of my decision. If Vienna is your dream, you should follow it, with or without me." Alexander nodded, understanding the wisdom in her words. "Fair enough." That night, after Alexander left, Emily remained awake for hours, contemplating the possibilities opening before her. The safe path, staying, finishing university, building her career at BW Investments or another national company, or the leap into the unknown, Vienna, a new country, a new language, new opportunities, with the man who had entered her life by accident and quickly became essential. The decision wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, Emily allowed herself to really imagine the possibility. A small apartment in a European city, Alexander playing piano while she studied under a lamp's light, both building something new, together. The thought brought both fear and hope, exactly as love should be. The following months passed in a whirlwind of decisions, preparations, and goodbyes. Alexander made his audition for the Vienna Conservatory via video conference, playing Accidental Encounters with such passion that the evaluators were visibly moved even through the screen. Acceptance came a week later. Emily, after long conversations with her parents, teachers, and mentors, decided to apply for the master's program in Vienna. Robert Blackwood's letter of recommendation, surprisingly enthusiastic, weighed significantly in her acceptance with full scholarship. "Are you sure this is what you want?" her mother asked, while helping her pack. Emily's childhood bedroom now chaos of clothes and memories. "I'm scared," Emily honestly admitted. "But yes, I'm sure." "Because of him?" The tone wasn't accusatory, just concerned. Emily thought carefully before answering. "Not just because of him. For me too. This is an opportunity I never imagined having. studying at one of Europe's best universities, experiencing a completely different culture, expanding my horizons. Her mother nodded, carefully folding a sweater. I just don't want you to sacrifice your dreams for a romance. I'm not, Emily assured, hugging her mother. I'm combining my dreams with something new and unexpected. That doesn't mean abandoning who I am or what I want. At the airport, 2 weeks later, a small group gathered for farewells. Emily's parents, emotional but proud. Rachel, promising to visit during holidays. Anthony Lewis and some internship colleagues wishing success. And surprisingly, Robert Blackwood, who had become an unexpected ally. Take care of my son, he said upon hugging her, a gesture that would have seemed unthinkable months before. And more importantly, take care of your own dreams. Alexander needed someone who would inspire him to follow his. Don't give up on yours. Thank you for everything, Emily replied sincerely, for trusting me, professionally and personally. Robert smiled, a gesture that completely softened his usually austere face. Helena would have adored you. I think she somehow orchestrated all this. The idea of Alexander's mother as a spiritual guardian of their relationship was strangely comforting. The moment for final farewells came too quickly. Tears were shed. Promises of frequent visits were made. Alexander waited patiently, understanding how difficult it was for Emily to leave her family for the first time. When they finally passed through passport control, Emily felt the weight of the decision. It was really happening. They were embarking together on a journey that had begun with an accidental kiss on a night that now seemed so distant. Any regrets? Alexander asked softly as they walked to the departure gate. Emily looked at him, the man who had entered her life by chance and transformed everything. The heir who had chosen music over the empire. The pianist who had composed a piece about their encounter. None, she replied with certainty. And you? Just one, he said, surprising her. Which one? Alexander smiled, that smile that still made her heart race. That it took me so long to find that library that night. Emily laughed, the tension of farewell dissipating slightly. Then we should thank Richard Martinez and his annoying insistence. Without him, I would never have fled there. True, maybe we should send him a postcard from Vienna. The boarding announcement echoed through the speakers. It was time. In the boarding line, Alexander held Emily's hand firmly. Ready for the next part of our story? Emily looked at their intertwined fingers. Hers, calloused from years of intense studies and hard work. His, with long pianist fingers born in privilege but dedicated to art. So different and yet perfectly complementary. Ready, she replied, feeling simultaneously terrified and totally convinced. Vienna received them with a gray autumn sky and cold air that penetrated their coats, so different from New York's humid heat. The small apartment they rented was in an old building in the Neubau district, near both the conservatory and the university. It was modest compared to the Blackwood mansions, but for Emily, it represented something more valuable than luxury. A new beginning, built together. The first months were a whirlwind of adaptation. German proved more difficult than they expected, though the classes they had taken before leaving helped with the basics. Academic routines were demanding. Alexander immersed in daily piano practice and music theory, Emily navigating the complexities of international macroeconomics in a foreign language. In the evenings, exhausted but stimulated, they shared that the day's experiences over simple meals they learned to prepare together. The apartment gradually became a home. Photos of Emily's family on the walls, a digital piano that occupied a good part of the living room, books in Portuguese, English, and German piled on improvised shelves. Do you miss home? Alexander asked on a particularly cold winter night, as they watched snow fall through the window, a spectacle still magical for both. Sometimes, Emily admitted, wrapped in a blanket on the sofa. I miss my parents, the warmth, even the city's noise, but I also feel at home here, with me. Alexander sat beside her, bringing 2 cups of hot chocolate. With you. In this place we built together. Emily gratefully accepted the cup. It's strange, but I've never felt so belonging to some places here, where technically I'm a foreigner. Alexander smiled, understanding perfectly. I know exactly what you mean. I spent my whole life living in houses that never seemed truly mine. And now, this tiny apartment, with questionable plumbing and noisy neighbors, Emily completed, laughing. Exactly. It's more home than any mansion ever was. There was deep truth in that observation. The apartment wasn't just a physical space, but a tangible manifestation of the choice they had made, abandoning the comfort of the familiar to build something authentic together. As the European winter gave way to spring, their lives in Vienna acquired their own cadence. Emily excelled in her studies, her unique perspective on emerging markets catching the attention of professors who had initially been skeptical about the Brazilian student. Alexander prepared for his first important recital at the conservatory, where he would present Accidental Encounters to a public audience for the first time. "I'm nervous," he confessed the night before the presentation, his fingers obsessively repeating a difficult passage on the piano. "What if they don't understand the piece? It's so personal, so true," Emily completed, massaging his tense shoulders. "That's why it will touch people, because it comes from a real place." The Musikverein, with its perfect acoustics and imposing architecture, was partially occupied for the conservatory students' recital. In the front row, Emily watched with an accelerated heart as Alexander took the stage, elegant in a black suit that contrasted with the other European students' traditional tailcoats. When he sat at the piano, there was a moment of absolute silence. Emily saw him briefly close his eyes, centering himself, before positioning his hands on the keys. The first notes of Accidental Encounters filled the hall, hesitant and soft, exactly as those first moments in the library had been. Gradually, the melody evolved, gaining complexity and emotion. The confusion of the accidental kiss, the discomfort of worlds colliding, the mutual discovery in the garden, in the music house. Emily recognized each passage as a chapter of their story. The turbulent section representing obstacles, the romantic interlude of their secret meetings, the dramatic tension of Robert's discovery, and finally, the harmonious resolution culminating in a hopeful coda. Vienna, the new beginning, the future. When the last note dissipated in the Musikverein's perfect air, there was a moment of reverent silence before the audience exploded in applause. Alexander opened his eyes, immediately finding Emily's. In that shared look was everything: gratitude, love, awareness of the extraordinary path they had traveled since that first night. The applause continued, more enthusiastic than for any other student that night. Alexander stood to thank them, and Emily saw a tear quickly escape down his face before he could contain it. After the recital, professors and colleagues surrounded Alexander with praise. A particularly respected elderly professor approached Emily while she waited in a corner. "You're Emily?" he asked in English with a strong German accent. Surprised, she nodded. "Yes, Alexander told me about you, about how you met." The professor smiled gently. "I've been a composition professor for 40 years, and I rarely hear a student piece with such authentic emotion. The muse is clearly as talented as the composer." Emily blushed at the unexpected compliment. "The talent is all his." "No, my dear. Inspiration is a form of collaboration." The professor gently squeezed her arm before walking away. "You created something beautiful together." When they finally left for the Viennese night, a light drizzle fell over the city. Alexander held Emily's hand firmly, still vibrating with the performance's adrenaline. "It was incredible," she said, squeezing his hand. "You were incredible." "I felt you in every note," Alexander confessed, pulling her close. "As if we were reliving everything, from beginning to now, from the accidental kiss to Vienna, and beyond. Retry G, continue, edit D." Alexander stopped under an old street lamp, the ice soft light illuminating his now serious face. "Emily, I need to ask you something." The suddenly formal tone made her freeze. "What's wrong? Is everything okay?" In response, Alexander did something completely unexpected. Right there, on the wet sidewalk of a Vienna side street, he knelt before her. "Alexander!" Emily exclaimed, looking around nervously. "What are you doing? The sidewalk is wet. Your suit will—" "I don't care about the suit," he interrupted, taking a small box from his pocket. "I care about you, about us." Emily's heart seemed about to explode. "Alexander, I had planned to do this more elaborately," he admitted with a self-conscious smile. "Maybe at a fancy restaurant or during a Sunday walk in Schönbrunn. But after playing our story today, I realized we never planned anything. Our best moments were always spontaneous, unexpected, like now." Emily felt tears forming in her eyes, mixing with the light drizzle. "Emily Parker," Alexander continued, opening the box to reveal a simple but elegant ring with a single brilliant stone. "You gave me courage to follow my true path. You showed me it's worth risking everything for what really matters. It was the happiest stumble of my life. Will you marry me? The simplicity of the question, made without grand elaboration, was perfectly them. It wasn't a billionaire heir proposing to the talented intern, nor the promising pianist to the economics student. It was just Alexander asking Emily to marry him, two people who had chosen to build something together, despite all odds. "Yes," she replied, tears now flowing freely. "Of course, yes." Alexander quickly stood up, placing the ring on her finger, before kissing her deeply, right there under the Viennese rain. Passers-by smiled or cast curious glances at the obviously foreign couple celebrating in the middle of the sidewalk. "We're soaked," Emily laughed when they finally separated, both completely drenched by the rain that had intensified. "Seems appropriate," Alexander replied, embracing her again. "We started with an accident. Why not continue with a little chaos?" They walked home hand in hand, soaked but radiant, occasionally stopping to kiss like teenagers under the rain. The ring gleamed softly on Emily's hand, a tangible symbol of the extraordinary journey they had begun that night at the Blackwood mansion. 2 years later, on a sunny spring afternoon, an auditorium in Vienna was packed for a special event. Stage. A grand piano waited, illuminated by a single spotlight. Backstage, Alexander adjusted his tie, trying to control his nervousness. This wasn't just another recital. It was his graduation concert, the culmination of years of intensive study and dedicated passion. "Breathe," Emily instructed, adjusting the flower on his suit's lapel, her engagement ring now accompanied by a simple wedding band. "You're ready for this." "I'm more nervous than at our wedding," Alexander admitted, trying to smile. "Well, this time you don't have to deal just with my mechanic father trying to intimidate you," Emily joked, "but with music critics from all over Europe." "Your father is scarier than any critic," Alexander replied, now genuinely smiling. Emily laughed, remembering her father's serious expression during the small wedding they had held in the US 6 months earlier. A simple ceremony that united both worlds, held in the garden of the Blackwood country house, but with decorations made by Emily's mother and a cake prepared by her aunt. Robert Blackwood and Mr. Parker had developed an unlikely friendship, discovering in common the experience of having built something from scratch, a financial empire and a respected mechanic shop respectively, and unconditional love for their children. "5 minutes, Mr. Albuquerque," an assistant announced, interrupting Emily's thoughts. Alexander breathed deeply. "This is it. I'll be in the front row," Emily promised, kissing him softly. As always, the concert program included classical pieces by Chopin and Rachmaninoff, followed by the world premiere of an original composition titled Converging Paths, Alexander's graduation piece. When he finally sat at the piano for the last presentation, he looked directly at Emily in the front row. Beside her were Robert Blackwood, Emily's parents, Rachel, and even Mrs. Clara, who had made her first international trip, especially for the occasion. The first notes of Converging Paths were reminiscent of accidental encounters, but more mature, more complex. If the first composition told the story of their meeting, this narrated their shared journey, the challenges of adaptation in Vienna, discoveries, mutual growth, building a life together. The piece culminated in a powerful duet between the left and right hands, two distinct melodies that, while maintaining their individual identities, harmonized perfectly, exactly as Emily and Alexander had learned to do. When the last note dissipated in the silent auditorium, there was a moment of perfect suspension before the audience exploded in applause. Alexander stood up, visibly emotional, accepting the ovations with humility. After the protocol bows, he did something unexpected. He moved away from the piano and walked to the stage's edge, extending his hand to Emily. Surprised and slightly mortified, she shook her head no. Alexander just smiled, insisting with the gesture. Reluctantly, Emily accepted his hand and climbed onto the stage, feeling her face burn under the curious audience's gazes. "Ladies and gentlemen," Alexander spoke, in English, arm around Emily's waist. "This is my wife, Emily, and this piece is as much hers as mine. Because all great music needs inspiration, and she is mine." The applause renewed, now directed at both. Emily, overcoming her initial embarrassment, bowed slightly before hugging Alexander. "You're impossible," she whispered in his ear. "Completely," he agreed, "and you love me for it." It was true. She loved him for the spontaneity, the passion, the ability to transform a common moment into something extraordinary. just as he loved her for her strength, determination, and authenticity. At the reception after the concert, while navigating between professors, critics, and family members, the conservatory director approached with a serious expression. "Mr. Albuquerque, an exceptional performance," he commented, shaking Alexander's hand. "Particularly the original piece. Very moving. Thank you, Herr Director." "I received an interesting call this morning," the director continued, "from the Berlin Philharmonic. Apparently they heard recordings of your compositions and are interested in including accidental encounters in their next season. As a guest piece." Alexander visibly paled. "The Berlin Philharmonic? That's extraordinary, yes," the director completed with a small smile. "Especially for someone so young. They also mentioned the possibility of a composition residency." Emily squeezed Alexander's hand, feeling the tremor of emotion that ran through him. It was an opportunity beyond his most ambitious dreams to have his music performed